Good morning, Linda. This is John Ondrick, and I'm talking to Linda Tippie from SunTrust, who is a producing manager. Has been in the business a long time. And before we get started, I'd just like to say Linda is one of the major producers in the business. Consistently does $3 to $4 million a month. But that's behind the story. She really does over 400 loans because she has a low loan amount. If she was working some of the high price spreads up in McLean, you'd be doing a lot more volume. Anyway, before we start, everybody likes to know where people came from and how they got in the business and a little bit about you personally. So why don't we start there?
Okay, John. Well, I started in the business about 20 years ago. My husband was Air Force. We moved around a lot, and I really started in St. Louis, Missouri, when we were stationed there, working for Savings and Loan, and I started out as originator processor, and then later I went worked as an FHA VA closer, and then we went overseas for about 5 years, and I was out of the business. When I came back to the United States in '85, I immediately got back into mortgage banking. That was always my forte. I loved it. I loved the chaos of it. And so I started here at Crestar about 15 years ago, and actually I came on board as a processor because that was all that was available at the time.
In Lynchburg?
Yes, in Lynchburg. And I started out like processing and really taking loan applications. I just didn't have the title as a... And then shortly after that, I became an originator, and then I became branch manager about eight and a half years ago.
I'm interested. One of the things that kind of strikes me about your record is the fact that there are very few people in their first year of business that crank the kind of volume that you did, a huge volume in your very first year, and did that with loan amounts that are very small. I think your average loan amount today is still in the very low 80,000. So I'm kind of curious how you did that because it's so unusual.
Well, I had a great reputation when I started here, as I had some background in government lending. And here in Lynchburg area, for some reason, everyone shied away from FHA VA loans. And since I had a background in that, I was able to generate a lot of business through that, and because of my knowledge. And at that time, there were not a lot of lenders in town, or no lenders in town, that really did government loans. So because of that, my reputation spread, and I believe that was why I was able to do the dollar and the volume because of that.
Did you concentrate, as many loan officers do when they first start, exclusively on realtors?
Well, I really didn't have to. That's where most of my business came from, but because of the word spreading about the government lending, they just really sought me out, and that was really great for me, that I really didn't have to get out.
It's a nice way to start business.
Exactly.
We all know the horror stories of people starting off in bad markets and not knowing anyone, and so it is a bit unusual. What do you think the reason is that people, because I know Lynchburg reasonably well, and it's a small and really beautiful town, nice place to live and raise a family. Why do you think that is that people were not aware of these government programs? Because it's so much easier to qualify, and we all know the advantages of government loans other than the paperwork.
Well, I think a lot of that comes from no one having the knowledge of government lending, and some horror stories from some who had tried to originate and really didn't have the home office or the support or know anything about them, and it was like 4 and 5, 6 months to get them through. So again, when we talk about word getting out in a small town, that's exactly what happened, and they thought, oh no, we don't want to do that. And that's really from not knowing anything about them.
So yours was more of an educational process, and explaining to them, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, that there is a way to do these loans that doesn't take that kind of time. And I noticed you threw 5 or 6 months out, and I can well remember when I started, pretty much way before you actually, but where getting some of these loans done did take an incredibly long time. I worked in the Virginia area, and getting an appraisal done, and sending the request to FHA, and maybe they get it, maybe they wouldn't, and if they didn't get it, just trying to get hold of them to find out. It was just bizarre.
Oh, that's true, John. The bureaucracy of the paperwork back then, you're exactly right. And so it was just an educational process. Once they realized that I knew what I was talking about, that's why I really didn't have to go out and beg for business. It just kind of showed up, which was wonderful.
Mm-hmm. I noticed from some of the material that I know that you do about 35%, 35% in FHAs today, which kind of means that you also do, conversely, about 70% in other types of loans. Is that true? I mean, are you doing a lot of conventionals now?
Well, that is true, and also I do a lot of interim paperwork for a couple of programs here in Lynchburg Neighborhood Redevelopment, where VHDA really is on the lending end of that.
Yeah, I'm familiar with it.
And we end up doing conventional loans up to 95% with no PMI. So that's why a lot of the governments have gone away, because they've come up with these other programs to benefit first-time buyers.
Right, where they're floating bonds to get the guarantees and get that interest rate down.
Exactly.
Would you recommend people that are starting in the business look into some of the government programs and state programs?
Oh, sure. I think if you have a knowledge of that, there is a lot of business out there to be tapped that hasn't even been even thought about yet. Yes, I would tell them that instead of, trying to go for the big bucks right away. And I think that's how I built my business, because I started out, I think knowledge is everything about anything that you do.
Mm-hmm.
I think the more you know, the more you're able to help others, and not just try to go after the big dollars, because that's what makes you money.
Well, there are people in this business, in the motivational business too, that say that when you boil it all down, it really comes down to two things: know your product and know how to close.
Exactly. Knowledge is everything, and I've always made it a point to know my products and know what I can do before I'm out there telling somebody, bring me your business. And I think my reputation is really where I get a good deal of mine.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've all made mistakes. I've already told this story in another interview, so I won't repeat it in its entirety, but I made a very fatal mistake with a major realtor at Long and Foster years ago, because I didn't know at the time that doing a VA loan, that if the person was overseas, the actual veteran, you had to have a cable from his commander saying that he was alive that day. And I thought it was the most preposterous thing that I'd ever heard of. Looked at the woman and said, well, that's just silly. And that was the end of me forever.
Right.
We actually became pretty good friends, but she never gave me a loan. So.
It doesn't take but one or two of those, and I think we all have been there in this business. Letting somebody assume something, and in the end, they never forgive you.
Mm-hmm.
They might be your friend, but they won't bring you any business.
Well, that's right. I probably every third interview I do, we talk about you're only as good as your last loan, and part of the reason of that, I kind of, I'm even a little bit flippant about it at times. But the fact of the matter is that when a realtor loses a deal, they're losing $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, sometimes more in a commission. And when we lose a deal, we being in the mortgage business, we may lose $400 or $500, and so they take it much more seriously when something gets messed up.
Yeah, I agree, and I've learned that too. To have respect for the other person and not just think about. I think that's where empathy comes in. I'm pretty good at that. I have a lot of empathy for trying to put myself in their situation.
Mm-hmm. When you're out there dealing in the realtor market, you're obviously well established today. Do you have a certain base of realtors and companies that you call on? Do you still call on new companies? What do you do?
Well, you know, John, I really don't do a lot of calling anymore. I have probably 7 or 8 good realtors that send me business, and they really prefer, as far as they go, as keeping them informed about any new things that are on the market or products, and I keep them informed of their loans, and they trust me to do that, and they like to know that I'm where they can find me with a phone call. And if I'm out in the field a lot, that makes it really hard. So I've been able to stay in my office and really be able to generate more business by knowing where they can find me immediately, as opposed to be out calling. I do a lot of things here. I do a couple of, they have a professional forum in the newspaper that comes out once a month, and they send me questions and I answer them, and I've been able to get some business out of that. And plus,
could you go into that a little more detail?
Okay.
I picked up a little piece that you did that, but in the interviews I do, we're always looking for one good new idea, and I've never done an interview where I haven't come up with or somebody didn't come up with a new idea, so perhaps you might address that in more detail.
Okay, well, what this professional forum column includes mortgage lending, psychiatrists, spiritual, a pastor, all different kind of businesses, and they get questions, and they fax them over to us to answer the question that they want in that particular paper. So she usually sends me 2 or 3. Like, I was just working on it this morning before you called, and one of my questions this week is, why do sellers agree to pay closing costs sometimes and other times do not?
Mm-hmm.
Those kind of things. So I answer and fax it back to her, and she says that the girl that handles it at the newspaper says that these are questions that they get sent in to them, and that's the ones they're asking me to answer. So once a month, that's what we do, and they have your picture and your address and the company that you work for, and then the question and then the answer.
Mm-hmm. Do you get calls off that? And if you do, any idea of the numbers?
Well, you know I don't, but I tell you what, I get more calls off of that from just individuals as opposed to real estate agents that see my picture, and because you've been somewhere a long time and they keep seeing you, they develop that trust enough to give me a call. And so, I really have not kept tabs on that.
I think this. I like this idea, and the reason I like this idea is because, first off, it has not come up before in all the other interviews. So this proves my theory of one good idea coming up. But I think more to the point that this is something that a reasonably new loan officer with even 6 months experience, all the way up to the old pros, this is something that can be done to go out to some of these local newspapers. I know that in the area that I live, and previously when I lived in Great Falls in Virginia near Tyson's Corner, we were constantly bombarded with local newspapers, either starting up or been around for a long time. And I really cannot remember too many of them that carried columns by mortgage brokers or mortgage bankers. I would see a lot of stuff, a lot of tombstones with realtors' pictures in them, and but not too much by mortgage bankers. So this is might be a good source of business to approach these people.
Well, you know, I agree. And actually, the gentleman just started that worked at the newspaper office got this idea a couple of years ago, and I knew him, and he came over and asked me if I was interested, because he had seen that done in a couple of other papers like Roanoke and other smaller towns, and it seemed to go over well, and it's been a great success. And I guess we're probably going on our 3rd year of doing that. And people tend to trust people in any line of business that they continually see, you know, your picture and your questions and your answers, and they try to do all the questions in really simple form and answers in simple form that anyone picking it up can understand.
Yeah, I think there's a version on a higher level to take this, and I'll take it right back down again. I think that's the reason that you find companies like Coca-Cola, and Pepsi, and some of the other large companies, they advertise, and when you look at it, you don't really see some intended message. You're just kind of getting that name out, and to take it down a level in the Great Falls, Virginia area where I live was a very wealthy area. There were a lot of realtors out there looking for business. Average home price is probably $500,000 and up, and because of that, the fight over customers and people coming in was intense, and you would just see month after month after month agents, 5 or 6 of them in particular, that would have large tombstone ads with their pictures on, with all their credentials and designations and everything. And this very up until this very day, I can probably list 5 or 6 of these people who I've never met, but I know who they are, and it's just amazing the amount of business, because I actually know one of them, a fellow named Danny Latham, who's very successful, and that's what he does. And the amount of calls that he gets, it's incredible off these ads.
Well, John, I think, of course, SunTrust Crestar has a great reputation, and I think the company that you work for is important. But I also think that people today like to find someone that they can trust, and they do put a face with that. So I think when you market with your picture, I think that really is very comforting to someone looking for that particular line of business, whatever we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also find it interesting that the bulk of your calls are not coming in from realtors, probably because most of the realtors probably know who you are at this point in time, but just the average Joe out there that's looking and sees that you're an expert on FHA and kind of been thinking about it and are renting, and that you're the name they remember.
Oh, I agree, and I think a lot of this business is confidence and trust, and a lot of my business, or probably most of my business, does come from referrals or word getting out, or perhaps they've seen my picture and they ask a friend, oh yeah, we know who she is. And I think a lot of business is getting that way because things are changing so rapidly, and just because you offer your product or whatever, that really doesn't develop that trust unless they have a person that they know and can trust to come talk to about whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. Do you take your own loan apps?
Yes, I do.
Every one of them?
Every one of them.
How do you do that? That begs the question, of course, since you do consistently over 400 loans a year. How do you do that and keep sane at the same time?
Well, I have, and I don't think that I do them too quickly. I have learned how to take a loan app in a short amount of time and yet not let the customer feel rushed, and to give them all the information that they need. And I think that, I don't know, maybe that comes with a lot of practice. And I know a lot of top originators do not take their loan apps. They do the interviews and then allow a processor or an associate. Well, I do not have the staff to be able to do that. And I love people, and I like that one-on-one, and I think they do too. And so I do put in a lot of hours sometimes, but I have developed a pretty good system.
Yeah, I would not knock the other way, and I didn't think you intended to do that.
Oh, no, I did not.
But my point is that you're right. When I do talk to top producers, probably about half of them have people that intervene in the process somewhere. But interestingly enough, even the very top ones that do that, they really try and get at least some FaceTime in front of them. Right. Whether it's to take just the 1003 and then turn it over or whatever, but it's all in trying to develop that relationship so they know who you are and you can get your message across. Which leads me, and how do you manage your client base? Do you have a contact manager program? Do you fill out cards, keep sheets of paper in your pocket, and how do you do it?
Well, actually, I am just getting into maintaining my database and getting ready to really pursue some of that. I have really not had to do that before. We've got the ACT program now, and I'm
That's fabulous. Mm-hmm.
and ready to go for that. But I have really not done a lot of that, other than I've just really relied on advertising and word of mouth, but we all know business is changing so rapidly.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I have never interviewed somebody who didn't use. I'm not saying everybody uses ACT. Some don't use anything, but of the contact manager programs, they do use ACT. I'm probably the best promo for ACT. That I think I'm going to send them a letter and get some money from them. But it's a fabulous program. Once you get hooked on it, you will wonder how you ever live without it.
That's what everyone else tells me, and I wished I had more time, to be able to do a lot of the things. But Crestar operates, or SunTrust operates, a little different than some mortgage brokers, in that, as in staff and personnel and what you can do. So you've got to learn to do the best you can with what you've got,
right,
and utilize it properly, and that's what we try to do.
Have you ever thought of and I say this because a couple of days I'm going to be interviewing Don Ehrman, and he does incredible numbers of loans with no assistant. But have you ever thought of getting somebody to help you on your own, just to try and manage it?
Well, I'm going,
because it sounds like you're reaching a point here.
Yeah, you're exactly right, and that is on my agenda to do this year, to hire an assistant, because with your ACT program and your database, it's really no way that I could do the volume that I do, and I want to continue doing that, yet do the necessary things such as that. So, yes, that is on my agenda this year.
Mm-hmm.
Really, the only reason I haven't done it is a space, to have a place for someone to work to assist me with my regular staff.
But I'm sure you'll solve that.
Oh, yes.
by necessity.
Oh, you're just going to have to.
Do you? Let me ask you something. Do you work other areas of the business besides realtors? I'm not talking about personal referrals that we'll call back. Talking more in the area of attorneys or title companies or people that you develop relationship with. Yes,
I do, and I have some attorneys here that do refer me business, and kind of back and forth, which, I find people, I only refer people that I trust and know myself. So I have built up a referral base that way with some of the title companies, some of the attorneys. I know a couple of CPAs here
mm-hmm.
that, we refer business back and forth. Insurance companies, not a lot, but some.
You said insurance companies. What do you mean? What type of insurance companies?
Well, actually, really, mostly what we started out is homeowners insurance. And,
mm-hmm.
of course, if, we're not allowed to just refer one, but I have two or three that I have confidence in and their company and what they do. So I am happy to refer them to my customers that are in my office here,
mm-hmm.
and they, in turn, do the same for me if they know someone that has a...
So you would recommend, once again, not trying to put words in your mouth, but you would recommend for those listeners out there trying to expand their business that they do refer people to CPAs and attorneys, because it's a two-way street.
Oh, sure, and if you develop that relationship and they, trust you at what you do and vice versa, it can be a great way to network some business.
When you deal with CPAs and attorneys, is there something? Do you establish social relationships, or do you kind of keep it on a business level?
I keep it on a professional level. Nearly all of my relationships are on a professional level. I consider a lot of the people my friends, but I don't really socialize that much to get business.
Mm-hmm. How do you maintain this business? Are there any things you do, like send them gifts or cards or birthday cards? Just kind of looking for little things that you do that help maintain that business.
Well, John, I may be the exception here, and I do not do gifts. I do gifts for my customers, my closing customers, but I do not do gifts with any of the other people that I work with. We just, over the years, have been able to develop a professional relationship, and the ones that I do business with are perfectly happy with that. They don't, evidently they don't feel the need for that,
mm-hmm.
because I've never done it.
I find that interesting, because you're absolutely right. You are an exception, but the exceptions are interesting, of course. And I guess maybe there's a point to be made there that if you do a professional job, that it's not necessary. Helpful, but not necessary.
Right, and I know that probably doesn't apply to all, and I'm not opposed to those that do that, but I have always preferred to be professional at what I do, and I've never felt like that I needed to do that. I think you need to recognize people, and I do. If their name is in the paper for promotion or something like that, I do send a card or something like that. But I've just never done the other.
How many people do you manage?
We have 6 here in our office now.
Mm-hmm.
I have just one other originator that works here, and we each have our own processor. And I have one closer in the office, and then I have another part-time person that comes in to help set up and submit loans for government submissions and that type thing.
Mm-hmm. Do you? What about on VA loans? Are you in the VA market at all?
Well, there is a lot of people that get out of the military and come back here and retire because we have B&W, which hires a lot of retirees, military. So yes, we do. Not a huge amount. It kind of comes and goes, but I do quite a bit of VA lending.
Because that's kind of dying off. At one time when you and I were a little bit younger, there were a lot of VA loans out there, but as the amount of people in the service kind of constricted over the year, you don't see as many. Although you can, and I even did it. You can use your VA a second time.
Yes, you can. And I think for my VA, since my husband was military, I knew a little bit about VA lending, and also I was a surviving spouse myself, so I was able to generate a little bit of business that way as well. And of course, I have one realtor here that I work with that brings me a lot of business, that he does nothing but advertise VA.
Really?
And most of my VA is really through this particular realtor. That's how he advertises, because a lot of people don't even know they can use it over. They don't know anything about 100% financing. They just don't know.
Right.
He advertises every week, and I've been dealing with this particular realtor for probably 10 years, and his ads are always geared towards VA.
I used to, years ago, know a couple, fellow named Lance Lansdale and his wife Helen, and they were a husband-wife team. Lance was a highly decorated veteran that was a manager along a foster office, and they went so far as to get their VA. They would travel, they would take tours of bases and set up, little programs outside of bases and get veterans in, and they would travel all over on pre-scheduled tours for people that were, because at that time there were a lot of transfers, a lot of turnover, a lot of people coming into the Pentagon.
That's a great idea. And of course, SunTrust, Crestar, we're located down in the Newport News area, in the beach area, where they do a lot of government lending. And if I was closer to a base, I would do the same thing. Here we've got the reserves and a Marine station, and I do, contact them, and they know that, we do VA lending.
Mm-hmm.
But I've never, when I advertise in the paper, of course, most of us always state that we do that, but I've never really focused on that, and you might have just given me a good idea.
I'll send you my bill.
Yeah, that may be a good referral I've been looking
You're
for.
right. What about, if we can talk about pricing? It's not something I bring up a lot. Occasionally, though, I do like to talk about it. And this is one of these times. And I wondered, as a producing manager, if you would talk about pricing. We're not interested in anything proprietary with your company, of course, but in general, whether pricing makes a difference, how you handle pricing issues. As you know, to kind of lead into this, a lot of people are looking on the Internet today, not necessarily to take loans, but to get information.
Well, I do think pricing is a big part of it, and you're exactly right. People have become much more savvy as in shopping for rates, and you get a lot of calls for that. Crestar or SunTrust, of course, our rates change every day, and we get our pricing faxed in here to us. And I have a certain leeway that I can go, but we have decided never to give away the farm to get a loan, and
Sure.
I never make that an issue when I'm talking to someone and they say to me, "Well, so and so has this pricing. Can you match that? And I always tell them, well, you need to tell me what you're talking about, and I'll let you know if I'm able to do that. But I never tell customers, well, you check around and you call me back, and, I can beat that. I don't do business that way. I don't do that. And I also try to educate people when I get the opportunity to get them on the phone when they talk to me about pricing and discount points. Well, have you checked about the other fees and how much that is going to be? And as a matter of fact, some people may find this offensive, but customers find it really funny. I have this big sign that I had a friend make me off the computer, and it's a mouse trap that has mouse ears and eyes and feet and a big tail, and it says mouse traps always offer free cheese. And they really find that funny when they actually come in my office and sit down and see that sign, because some of the questions they were going to ask me, they don't. They just laugh.
Well, I think that there's a point to be made here. I'd like to explore it a little bit for the new loan officers out there, because I think one of the things that the new loan officers get hit with all the time is pricing issues, and especially from realtors, where, I got a quarter point better here, I got a half point better here, from people calling in on the phone. And it's kind of a lead into this, discussed this many times, and so I won't go into it a lot on the internet, where sometimes the pricing they're giving is very deceptive, because they'll give a low rate and point quote or a combination thereof. But the reality is, when you look at some of their junk fees and the additional fees they're adding on to the back end, it's not all that's cut out to be.
That's true. And when I get a lot of these calls and they'll tell me some price that another company has quoted them, and I always say, well, did you ask them, is this rate good until such and such a day? That kind of thing. And that is true. There's so many of us out there now trying to get business in the door. So I don't ever give customers the impression that, our pricing is better. I just always try to explain to them, give them the knowledge, and I've found out in doing that, I usually get them to come back to me by not promising the sun and the moon, but just explaining to them a little bit how it works, and they appreciate that.
How do you, I use the word differentiation, but how do you try and differentiate yourself beyond the fact that obviously it's a relationship business and you want to establish the relationship? How do you try and differentiate yourself? One way, obviously, is doing that newsletter, which I like a lot. Are there any other areas that you try and differentiate yourself with? Well,
other than SunTrust Crestar, we really have always been big on service, and I advertise that way. And
what do you mean advertise? How do you advertise?
I'm sorry?
How do you advertise?
Well, I'll tell you what, they have a weekly real estate review that comes out in the newspaper every week, and each realtor goes in there and they list a good deal of their properties in there with pictures and so forth from every firm. It's a weekly. And on the back, I never advertise unless he promises me the back page, because I want, I don't want to advertise on the inside.
Sure.
I want to, on the front. The front's not allowed. That's what they do is they pick an important historical something for Lynchburg, and they use the front for that, and then the back side. And I only advertise if I can get the half of the back page. And now that generates a lot of business, because that is something that's just looked by everyone that's looking for a home.
Is it like these homes magazines that go out?
Yeah. Exactly, and it's in the newspaper every week.
I think that's interesting placement. I think some of the listeners out there are going to pick up on that. What does that cost for? Do you take a half page or a full page?
I take a half a page, and it costs me $157 is what they charge for that.
And that's what comes out weekly or monthly?
It comes out weekly, and I've found I don't advertise every week, because if you advertise every week and then another lender comes in and wants that back page, then they get first choice because you've been running for a while. So I usually try to watch it, and I advertise maybe once a month on that back page, and I do a half a page, and I try. I've learned not to cram a whole lot of things into it. Usually it's house-to-home headquarters and 100% service, and then, the different kind of products that we do. our names, and that really generates a lot of business.
You know, what's interesting is that when you talk in terms of bang for the buck, at that kind of price, all you have to get is 1/3 of one deal, and maybe even less.
Exactly.
To pay for itself.
Oh, exactly. I totally agree.
Also, I would think, too, this is kind of a version of the realtor thing we were talking about of, getting your picture. And, I can't emphasize too much. This is how I personally feel, but I've seen it that, it's one thing to write a textual column or get text in, but when you associate a face with a name, there's something where people feel more comfortable. I don't know what it is. It's just that when you recognize a name, I can, in the Great Falls area, there's a woman who I haven't met in 20 years. Her name's Diane Balashi, and a very top producer for Long & Foster. And her picture is in there, in different forms of media. It's a much more intense situation up there, as you can imagine. And I can still visualize her face, and yet I haven't met her in 20 years.
Well, I totally agree, John. And some of the... Actually, SunTrust Crestar does not want you to put your pictures on your card, your business card.
Mm-hmm.
But I have something that I've done for a long time myself called Express Approval Kits, and it just has on the front page a list of the things they need, and I have my picture on the back, and they can either mail it in or whatever. But it's really more or less to get my picture out.
Mm-hmm.
And we have our personal brochures that I try to distribute everywhere I can that has my picture and a little bit about me, because I think you're right. I think people need to develop that trust, and I don't know why, but they do it, putting a face with someone they know, and by the time they come in here to see me, they pretty much feel like they know me, and I think that's what advertising is really all about.
Exactly. I don't know if you've seen your regional managers, Pat Casey's, his media that he uses with his picture, but it's really well put together. And, just a 2-3 pager, and it's just laid out great. It has his picture, and it's very professional. Another one who works for your company, Ed Navarro, his website is just fabulous. His picture comes up, and he advertises in 3 states without using an address, which I also think is very clever. And, just that comfort feeling of a face, I think makes a difference. I
agree. And, some of us old-timers, and I've been in the business for a while, and the way we used to do business was word of mouth or referral. But today, to be professional, you really marketing, I think, is everything. And I think the more that you do that in a professional manner, I think we're certainly going to get our rewards by more business by doing that. I really do.
Mm-hmm. What about competition in your market area? It's not a question I often ask, but I'm kind of curious. You're kind of a small to mid-sized town. I don't know if you would... How many people in your town?
Well, just in the city of Lynchburg, probably 150,000.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, we've got
so you're mid-sized. Mm-hmm.
Surrounding areas. And a little bit of trivia for Lynchburg, we're the largest metropolitan city without access to an interstate to our town.
Huh, very interesting.
Right, and we have a lot of colleges here, which brings in a lot of people.
What colleges do you have?
Well, we have Liberty University.
Okay, sure.
We have Randolph-Macon Women's College. We have Sweetbriar Women's College. We have Lynchburg College. So we have really, being a big college town, we really do have a great influx of people coming in. It didn't used to be that way. But competition here, when I started out in Lynchburg about 15 years ago, and I had just moved here at that time, back to here, from my husband passed away unexpectedly, and so I came home because I'm from here. But there was probably 4 of us lenders maybe in town, and now, there's probably 20 of us or more.
Mm-hmm.
And our size of our town has really not grown that much, I wouldn't say. So you can see that we've got a lot more competition out there, and we really have to be very professional at what we do to be able to continue, carrying the doing the volume that we do.
I was going to say, that's amazing. You do the volume year after year consistently when you have that many more people. I often allude back to the old days, not that they necessarily were better, but I think you'll agree that, when you called on realtors in those days, you're right, there may be 3-4 people, competitors calling on an account. Today, I know out in the Great Falls, Virginia area, you watch, there's a couple of large offices out there. One is Long and Foster, I'm familiar with. And, you have loan officers that are they're almost in line to go in to some of these offices now.
Well, a lot of mine, John, is the grace of God. Hey, He's really been good to me, and I contribute a lot of my business to that. I think that He takes care of sending me customers. They just seem to keep coming in, and I'm so thankful for that. I realize that you still have to market and do lots of things, but a combination of all of that has really given me the volume that I have, and I'm so thankful for it.
Rod Flowers, when I talked to him, he had a thing I remember. He said clients want 3 things. They want a quick response. They want prompt attention, and they want simple solutions.
I agree with that. And when I first started in the business, in fact, here in Lynchburg, my first boss told me, he said, Linda, if you'll always remember this, that the most important things to a man is really his home and his family and his money. And if you can always focus on that as you talk to people, and that's always been a great asset to me, and I remember that. That is true. If you try to direct what's most important to one's heart, you usually get what you want out of that, and both of you will walk away satisfied.
With the people that you're dealing with out there, do you find that the community that you're in is kind of a frenetic type, active community, kind of a laid-back community where the approach is a little bit different than if you were in a big city?
Well, that is true, and Lynchburg is a very, very conservative town, and that is changing to some degree because of the colleges and the different influx of people that are moving in now and not just locals. But, yes, I totally agree with that. They're a small community, and I think that's another reason why we're able to generate business by referrals and word of mouth as opposed to being in a bigger city, and I understand that. And I think that's one of the reasons because of that. And I try to participate in a lot of things that's going on. I don't know if I get any business from that. I've never really done that because of business. I just do it because I feel like we need to put back in a little bit of what we take out.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is an area that we don't talk about a lot, but I do talk about, and I'd like to know what do you, without invading your privacy, what do you invest your time in the community? Are there some areas that you feel, and I know you don't do this to get the business, you just stated that, but what are some areas that you do work with in the community?
Well, actually, really, the biggest thing for me has been this Lynchburg Neighborhood Redevelopment Foundation that I'm talking about. Now, I do some interim financing for them through VHDA, but this particular program that, does not generate me any business, they do lots of training for people, first-time home buyers, and they have lots of other programs that they work with single mothers, trying to rehabilitate them to the job market. There's lots of agencies out there for single parents, and I try to participate a lot in that, like participate in donations in my time and job fairs, different things, anything that they call and ask me that I'll come do to help them in their programs. I try to do that. And that's, like I said, mostly single mothers, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. But I would think that would come back to you at some point in time. The kind of picture I'm getting of you here that I think our listeners are too, it's a very uncomplicated package here where you are professional, you deal in service and relationships and community, and not jamming people, and knowing your product. There's a lot of basic things that are going into this soup. not high tech. Put your head down and just go about your business and do it well.
Well, John, I really think the simple way of everything is really the best way, and I know it's probably hard for some to get to that point, but I have always been able to do that. I like simple things, and probably when I make this statement, which I did in my article in The Mortgage Originator, that I never do business for the money, although we all know our income is an important part, but I've always tried to focus on what I can do to help someone, not what I can generate for myself. And I hope that that's been a good deal of my success is because of the empathy that I try to generate. I don't care if it's $10,000 mortgage or $300,000. I'm going to treat that person the same and really have an empathy for what they need. And I've really always tried to do that.
I think there's a segment, I'm going to just take a stab at this. I think there's a segment of our loan officer universe out there, which is according to Tom LaMalfa, is about 90,000 people. I think there's a segment out there, I'm not sure how large it is, but I certainly would think it's 15 to 20%, that is very much like you in the sense that they're maybe not A1, running around crazy, working 14 hours, giving speeches, going to ball games, sending coffee mugs, the whole routine, and of course that works for them. But I think there's a segment out there that's going to be very interested in listening to this with you, because they are laid back too. They or maybe not are A+ in personalities in the sociological way. I'm using A+ personalities where they, are frenetic and motivated and 12 cups of coffee and stuff like that. I think there's a segment out there that would like to hear what you have to say about this and how you run your business.
Well, I hope so, John, and I know that. I talk to new originators all the time. A lot of them will have read my article or know me, and they'll give me a call and stop by and, just interested in how I do business, which, is really very flattering to me. But I hope that something I've said is helpful to some. It's so hard today, I think, for new originators to get out there because it's not a hard business, but it is complicated in trying to get that in, to know how to generate business and to set yourself apart from everyone else. Mm-hmm. That's very difficult today.
I think so. And I think there's been some change, too, with realtors. I'm not sure it's been to the better. Maybe that's a subject for a different time and place, that argument. But I think it's hard. Let me just put it this way. I think it's harder to establish relationships with realtors today. There's more of them. They seem to operate at a pretty frenetic pace. And I just don't, and they're getting hit a lot, of course, with a lot of the new loan officers. And I think it's harder developing relationships with realtors today.
I agree, and I think a lot of that is people today do not trust. You used to have the time to develop that trust, and today, for some reason, because there's so many realtors out there and loan officers trying to generate business, and just going back to what you were telling me about that realtor in the VA incident, it just takes one time for them not to get what they want, and they just totally write you off and never give you another chance. And I think because of that today, and there's so much out there with technology that most of us can do the same thing. All of us offer the same products, and we're all pretty comparable, but, to find that niche to set yourself apart, it's very difficult.
Yeah, and especially for some of the new people, it's never easy. It is a people business.
Oh, I agree.
And it's never easy to do that. That's why I think sometimes you have a pretty high dropout rate in our business, where they just, either they're not made for the business or they just can't handle sometimes the length of time it takes to to get established, because it's not like you come in and start taking loan apps right away. You were an exception, but you were extremely well grounded when you kind of took off on the starting gate. You were lucky.
Right, and that is true, and I think it's hard for some to have the time and not need the other income to establish, just like real estate agents and originators, to give it that time to generate that business. A lot of them don't have that time or can't afford to take it, to develop the relationships that you really need to for this long term.
Right, exactly. Well, I think I'm going to end this interview on this high point. I do want to see you get your act together. No pun intended here. You'll find that it's a fabulous program. I strongly suspect in 6 months you'll call me back up and say, John, I don't know how I live without this thing.
Well, now Don Ehrman is a great user of that, and he's already sent me my videos and so forth to get myself trained, which I really appreciate it, because that's what he said. Once you do it, you'll wonder how you got along with
it. Well, I have about 700 people in my database. I probably could put another 300 or 400 if I got to it. And I just find that, and of course I don't do what you do, but I do find in my business that there is just no way that I can operate without it. I'll bet every fourth interview I do, we talk about ACT and get into it. Hopefully that'll sink in on some of the new people that can start their database early on, because we are slowly but inevitably moving into a technological society, and our business is moving very fast, as you know, with direct underwriter and getting not just pre-quals, but direct approvals within 15-20 minutes, where agents now come to expect that.
That is true. The faster we do things, the faster they expect it. That is exactly true. And when they call you, that's right away. How fast can you do this? But I'll tell you something interesting if we're not running out of time.
We are, but go ahead. Make it quick.
I was just talking to this gentleman. He said, technology is great. And he said, you guys might can approve a loan and close one in 3 days. He said, you tell me how many buyers and sellers could comply with that. I thought, that's true.
It's kind of racing ahead of the curve.
Exactly.
Anyway, well, look, I had a lovely time talking with you. I can't thank you enough. I think you've made a lot of good points, and as I said, I think there is a segment of people out here that are going to be very interested in listening to what you have to say. So thank you very much, Linda, and we'll talk to you later.
Thank you, John.